Security cameras in the marble-floored lobby of Orion Tower flickered to life and captured a moment they would later replay hundreds of times in investigations, press leaks, and closed-door board meetings. Adrian Langford stepped out of a sleek black town car with the polished confidence of a man who believed the world existed to accommodate him. His coat collar was still crisp from the valet's hands. His briefcase, an imported leather model no one else in the company dared buy, hung from his fingers like a weapon. His expression was tight, irritated. The kind of irritation that came from being forced to return to the office at nearly midnight because someone else hadn't done their job properly. The lobby was silent enough to make his footsteps echo. He didn't look around. Why would he? The night security staff were invisible, part of the building the same way the pillars and recessed lights were. Furniture with beating hearts. The cleaning crew was gone. They had the night off for a staff celebration. Most of the tech employees had cleared out before 9 p.m., leaving the offices deserted and humming with the low electric tone of servers and automated climate control. A single security guard sat behind the front desk, watching a mosaic of monitors glow in the dim light. He gave Adrian a small nod. Adrian didn't nod back. He pressed his thumb to the executive elevator's biometric scanner. A green ring of light circled his fingertip. Access granted, and the elevator doors slid open with a soft hydraulic sigh. He stepped inside without hesitation. The doors shut. 11:43 p.m. The elevator stopped at the 57th floor. Executive territory. The penthouse level. Adrian Langford's private kingdom. He walked down the hallway with a stride that communicated ownership. His name, Langford, gleamed from the frosted glass wall of the corner office. He entered his suite. The door closed behind him. 11:46 p.m. The internal motion sensor blinked on, registering activity. A silhouette. Movement near the desk. A hand reaching for something. Then, nothing. Stillness. Silence. 11:47 p.m. The sensor went completely dark. At 11:49 p.m. A figure appeared on the hallway camera. A security guard in standard Orion Tower uniform. He wasn't supposed to be on that floor. He didn't pause, didn't linger, didn't look back. He simply walked away, calm, unhurried, and took the service elevator down to the lobby, back to his post. No alarms, no panic, no sign anything was wrong. And there, behind the closed door of that office, Adrian Langford ceased to exist. No one saw him leave. No one saw him collapse. No one saw him struggle, because there was nothing left to see. His access card was never used again. His phone stopped responding to pings. His computer remained locked, untouched. His beautifully curated digital life froze at 11:47 p.m. And by sunrise, $71 million, funds tucked into a private account known only to Adrian and two board members, had evaporated into the shadowy corners of international banking. Gone with the precision of a surgeon's cut. The only person in the building that night who might have known anything, who might have seen something, was Marcus Hale, 52, soft-spoken, forgettable in every way except the way that mattered most, his ability to remain invisible. Co-workers described him as quiet, steady, a background kind of guy, the sort of man who knew everyone's routine while ensuring no one ever learned his. When day shift security arrived at 6 a.m. and discovered the CEO missing, his office sealed, and the company's hidden reserves empty, they tried calling Marcus. No answer. He wasn't in the building. He wasn't in the city. By the time the sun rose fully over the skyline, Marcus Hale was already 300 miles away, driving a faded 15-year-old Honda Civic that looked like it had never exceeded 40 miles an hour. Inside were two duffel bags containing everything he owned. He didn't speed. He didn't run red lights. He didn't look over his shoulder. He just drove into the quiet horizon like a man who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. And this meticulously timed, perfectly executed disappearance of a billionaire CEO is the story of how an invisible man walked through the front door, erased the most powerful person in the company, stole $71 million, and vanished so thoroughly that 4 years later, no one has found a single trace of him. Not one. Marcus Daniel Hale was born in 1969 in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Working-class family, high school graduate. He spent 30 years working in manufacturing, assembly lines, quality control, machine operation, the kind of steady, unremarkable work that built the American middle class and then abandoned it. He married at 23. His wife, Catherine, worked as a nurse. They had no children by choice, content with their modest life, a small house, reliable cars, annual vacations to state parks. They weren't wealthy, but they were stable. In 2015, everything changed. The factory where Marcus worked for 18 years closed abruptly. Foreign competition and automation made the plant obsolete. Marcus and 237 other workers received severance packages that seemed adequate until they tried finding comparable work in an economy that no longer valued their skills. Marcus applied for dozens of jobs. The responses were always the same: overqualified, underqualified, too old, position filled. At 46, he was too experienced to accept entry-level wages, but too specialized for anything outside manufacturing. In 2016, Catherine was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She fought for 11 months. Marcus burned through their savings paying for treatments insurance didn't cover. She passed away in September 2017, leaving him with medical debt and a house that felt too big and too empty. He sold the house to pay the bills, moved into a studio apartment in a cheaper part of town, applied for jobs that didn't require specialized skills: delivery driver, warehouse worker, building maintenance. In January 2018, he was hired as overnight security at Orion Tower, $12 an hour. No benefits. The company needed someone willing to work midnight to 8 a.m., 5 nights a week. Most people avoided overnight security. The pay was terrible, the hours destroyed your sleep schedule, and the work was mind-numbingly boring. Marcus didn't care about any of that. He needed income. He needed something to do during the hours when he couldn't sleep anyway, when the empty apartment reminded him of everything he'd lost. He started on January 15, 2018. They gave him a uniform, an ID badge, and minimal training. Sit at the desk, monitor the cameras, do hourly rounds, call police if anything unusual happens. Don't bother the executives. Marcus was good at not bothering people. He'd spent the last 3 years being systematically ignored by employers, by the healthcare system, by a society that had decided people like him were obsolete. Invisibility wasn't something he had to learn. It was something that had been imposed on him. The other security guards, younger men working day shifts, barely acknowledged him. He was the overnight guy, the oldest one, the quietest one. He didn't join their conversations about sports or weekend plans. He didn't share stories about his life because his life was something he wanted to forget. Employees who worked late occasionally encountered him during his rounds. If asked about him later, they struggled to describe him. Older guy. Quiet. Polite, I think? Nobody remembered his face clearly. Nobody recalled a single meaningful interaction. But Marcus noticed everything about them. Adrian Langford had built Orion Technologies the way men like him built everything, through force of will, calculated cruelty, and a willingness to break anyone who stood between him and the next valuation milestone. What started as a cramped 2-room software startup in a strip mall had, under his leadership, mutated into a $400 million tech empire, a sleek tower of steel and glass, a brand whispered about in investment circles, a company whose logo appeared on billboards, high-profile speaking panels, and job-hunting wish lists. But behind the PR glow, behind the investor charm and the magazine profiles, there was Adrian's real philosophy. People were tools. Tools wore down. Tools were replaced. He believed empathy was the death of innovation, and loyalty was a sentimental liability. When quarterly earnings dipped, he fired entire departments and replaced them with cheaper contractors. When pension programs began affecting profit margins, he slashed them, proudly calling the move fiscally visionary. When customer satisfaction tanked after he outsourced support to a bargain basement overseas vendor, he blamed the support staff themselves. Forbes celebrated him as a disruptor. Tech blogs labeled him a visionary. His employees whispered a very different word, but only when they were sure he wasn't within earshot. He was 58, though he carried himself like a man who believed he would never grow old. Twice divorced, both settlements bitterly contested. No children, by choice and by temperament. Personal relationships bored him. People disappointed him. The only thing he trusted fully was a spreadsheet and a server. He lived alone in a sprawling, architect-designed estate in the suburbs, a sterile mansion decorated by professionals and left mostly unused. He hated how quiet it was. He hated the echo of the marble floors. He hated the reminder that wealth, in the end, filled space but not life. So he worked late, always late. His office on the 57th floor was more of a home than his house, a place where he could micromanage international partners at 2 a.m., shuffle investments, and oversee a labyrinth of private accounts that no one else in the company even knew existed. Adrian trusted neither banks nor traditional financial institutions. In his view, they were bureaucratic, corrupt, and far too eager to freeze assets whenever a divorce attorney or federal investigator raised an eyebrow. So he had created an entire ecosystem of camouflage accounts, compensation funnels, and internal corporate reserve categories. $71 million hidden in plain sight. Money siphoned from profits through legal but ethically radioactive arrangements, parked in sub-accounts disguised as operational buffers. The board didn't know, the CFO didn't know, and Adrian took pride in the fact that nobody could touch a cent but him. He accessed his hidden nest egg only from one place on Earth, the workstation in his private office. The system wasn't connected to standard company infrastructure. It bypassed every security measure he forced on the rest of his staff. 2 firewalled servers, a proprietary offline token, a handwritten grid of passwords stored in his leather briefcase like sacred scripture. He believed this made him untouchable. No remote access meant no hackers. No digital storage meant no leaks. No shared credentials meant no witnesses. His paranoia was not a flaw. It was a religion. Adrian came to the office at night 2 or 3 times every month. He arrived alone, rode up alone, walked into his office alone. The same briefcase, the same routine, the same unwavering belief that predictability was security, that ritual protected him. He was so convinced of his genius that it never occurred to him that predictable routines are the easiest to exploit. He was wrong, more wrong than he had ever been about anything in his life, because someone had been watching him, not for days, not for months, for years. Someone he'd passed in hallways without eye contact. Someone he dismissed with the same indifference he showed to a paperweight or a floor plan. Someone who learned the building better than the architects, the schedules better than the managers, the blind spots better than the security engineers. Someone who had witnessed everything Adrian believed made him invincible, and cataloged every flaw with the patience of a man who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Someone Adrian Langford never saw. Someone he never even considered a threat. Someone who, on March 12, 2021, stepped out of the shadows and proved that an invisible man can topple a king. Marcus wasn't looking for an opportunity to steal when he started working at Orion Tower. He was just trying to survive. But survival meant paying attention, and paying attention meant noticing things other people overlooked. In his first month, he learned the building's rhythm, which floors were busy at which hours, which executives worked late regularly, which areas had camera coverage and which had blind spots, which doors closed properly and which had faulty latches, which security systems were maintained and which were ignored. He learned that the 57th floor, the executive penthouse level, had been renovated in 2005 but still used portions of the original 1980s infrastructure. The camera system up there was newer, but the underlying network was old. The angles were wrong in places, creating blind spots where hallways curved or walls jutted out. He learned that the cleaning crew never went to the 57th floor on Thursdays, because that was when Adrian worked late and refused to be disturbed. Thursdays became Marcus's night to do extra rounds up there, checking locks and lights that nobody else bothered with. He learned that Adrian Langford arrived at unpredictable times, sometimes 9 p.m., sometimes midnight, but always left by 2 a.m., always alone, always carrying the same briefcase. In his 3rd month working there, Marcus was doing his rounds on the 57th floor when he noticed something odd. Behind the main executive offices, there was a door marked Server Room B. It wasn't on his rounds checklist. When he checked the building directory, the room wasn't listed. Curious, he tried the door. Locked, but with an old electronic keypad from the 1990s. Six-digit code, the kind of lock that predated modern security systems. He reported it to his supervisor, who shrugged and said it was probably decommissioned storage. Nothing to worry about. But Marcus was curious. During his rounds over the next weeks, he examined the keypad closely. 3 of the numbers showed more wear than others, 3, 5, and 7. Those digits were used frequently. That meant the code probably used some combination of those 3 numbers, possibly repeated. He began testing codes during his rounds. 333, 33, 5, 5, 7, 777. Simple combinations first. None worked. He tried 357, 37, 573, 573, 7553, 753. Still nothing. It took him 6 weeks of patient testing to find it. 375, 375. The door clicked open. Inside was a relic. Old server racks from the 1990s, mostly empty, but not completely decommissioned. One terminal was still active, its screen glowing faintly in the darkness. Marcus logged into the system using a default admin password, admin Horn1234, that older systems commonly used. He found himself looking at network logs, data flowing through the building's infrastructure. Most of it was routine, employee emails, internet traffic, file transfers. But one set of logs caught his attention. Every few weeks, there were encrypted connection requests from the 57th floor to external servers. The timestamps matched Adrian's late-night visits. The data volumes were small, just login credentials and transaction confirmations. Marcus realized what he was looking at. Adrian's private financial access ran through this forgotten server room. The system had been set up decades ago when the building was constructed, designed to provide redundant connections before modern cloud infrastructure existed. Nobody had bothered to decommission it because it still functioned, and removing it would require expensive infrastructure updates. The server room was a ghost in the system. It existed, it worked, but nobody maintained it or monitored it. Data flowed through it, and the system logged that data as originating from within the building's secure network. Marcus understood the implications immediately. If someone accessed the system from this room, the financial servers would treat that access as legitimate, coming from inside the building's secure network. No additional verification required beyond the login credentials. All he needed was Adrian's passwords and security token. Over the next 18 months, Marcus began a patient, methodical campaign of observation that would have impressed military intelligence officers. He wasn't planning a heist initially. He was simply learning, understanding, documenting. He learned that Adrian kept a printed password sheet hidden behind a painting in his office. Marcus discovered this while cleaning smudges from the frame, something the regular cleaning crew never did because they weren't allowed in Adrian's office. But Marcus had a master security key that opened all doors during emergencies, and he used it during his rounds when Adrian wasn't there. He photographed the password sheet with a disposable camera, no digital trail, and memorized the contents. Adrian changed his passwords quarterly, but he followed a pattern. Month abbreviations combined with years and his initials. March 2019 AL, June 2019 AL. Simple, predictable. He learned that Adrian's RSA security token was old, one of the early models from the early 2000s. Marcus researched these tokens extensively at the public library, using their computers to access technical documentation. He learned they generated 6-digit codes that synced with server-side algorithms. If you had the physical token, you could generate valid codes. No backup verification required on older systems. But Marcus didn't have the physical token, so he researched further. He learned that these older tokens use predictable algorithms. If you knew the token's serial number and the current time, you could generate valid codes using publicly available software. The serial number was printed on the back of the token. One night during his rounds when Adrian wasn't present, Marcus entered his office using the master key. He found the token in Adrian's desk drawer, photographed the serial number, put everything back exactly as it was. Adrian never knew. He learned that Adrian kept the token in his briefcase during his late-night visits, along with a leather planner containing handwritten notes about his accounts. Adrian was paranoid about digital records, but ironically trusting of physical documents. He believed paper couldn't be hacked. Marcus learned the contents of that planner too during another unauthorized visit. Account numbers, server addresses, authentication sequences, all written in Adrian's precise handwriting, organized with the meticulousness of someone who'd built his fortune through careful documentation. He learned that Adrian's access card, the biometric badge that opened executive elevators and restricted floors, had never been updated since 2006. It used an older RFID chip that could be cloned if you had access to the right equipment and enough time. Marcus researched RFID cloning extensively, bought equipment using cash at electronics shops in different cities, never the same store twice. He claimed to be a hobbyist working on home automation projects. Nobody questioned him. Old men buying electronics weren't suspicious. He practiced cloning access cards using his own badge until he could do it reliably. The process required getting within a few inches of the target card for several seconds. Marcus accomplished this during moments when Adrian used the lobby biometric scanner, standing nearby, his own reader hidden in his jacket pocket, capturing the card's data as Adrian pressed his thumb to the glass. It took 3 attempts over 2 months to get a clean read, but eventually Marcus had everything he needed to create a perfect copy of Adrian's access credentials. He created 8 offshore accounts over the course of 14 months, using false identities built from discarded documents he found in the building's trash, old utility bills, expired driver's licenses, credit card statements people threw away without shredding. He pieced together enough information to create synthetic identities, names that existed on paper but not in reality. He opened accounts in countries with minimal verification requirements: Malta, Belize, Montenegro, Cyprus, Hong Kong. Each required different documentation, but the documents were easy to forge when you had months to prepare and access to genuine templates found in corporate trash. He never used his home internet for any research related to the plan. He used public libraries in different cities, drove 2 hours to use a library in Pittsburgh, 3 hours to use one in Cleveland, 4 hours to Buffalo. Never the same location twice. Paid cash for gas. Left no digital trail connecting Marcus Hale to any aspect of his preparation. He practiced every element of the plan, timing his movements between floors, testing how long it took the old terminal to boot up, calculating how many seconds he'd have in various blind spots, rehearsing his actions until they became automatic. He wasn't driven by greed exactly. He was driven by something colder, the understanding that Adrian Langford had everything Marcus had lost: wealth, security, options. And Adrian had achieved it by destroying hundreds of lives through layoffs and cost-cutting while hoarding money in secret accounts. Marcus had lost his wife because he couldn't afford better treatment, had lost his career because corporations like Orion Technologies had eliminated American manufacturing jobs, had lost his future because the economic system valued people like Adrian and discarded people like Marcus. This wasn't revenge. Revenge was emotional. This was correction, taking from someone who had too much and would never miss it. Disappearing into a life that should have been possible through honest work, but was now only achievable through perfect execution of an impossible crime. By February 2021, Marcus was ready. He just needed the right night, when Adrian would be alone, when the building would be empty, when all the variables aligned. He monitored Adrian's patterns even more carefully in those final months. Notice that Adrian came to the office during moments of crisis: bad earnings reports, board conflicts, regulatory pressure. Those were the nights when he'd work latest, when he'd be most distracted, most focused on his financial position. Marcus waited for the perfect storm, and on March 12, 2021, it arrived. March 12, 2021. Marcus arrived for his shift at 11:30 p.m. Friday night. Most employees had left by 6 p.m. for the weekend. The building was quiet. He checked the schedule at the security desk. The cleaning crew had the night off. Annual staff party at a restaurant downtown. The only other security was the remote monitoring service that watched the cameras from an off-site facility, and they only flagged emergencies. Routine movements didn't trigger alerts. At 11:42 p.m., Marcus saw Adrian's town car pull up on the lobby camera. He watched Adrian enter, briefcase in hand. The CEO looked irritated. Marcus had learned to read his moods. This was the expression Adrian wore when quarterly numbers disappointed him or when board members questioned his decisions. Adrian used his biometric scanner at the executive elevator without acknowledging Marcus. The doors closed. The elevator ascended to 57. Marcus waited exactly 3 minutes. Then he stood, adjusted his uniform, and took the service elevator to the 56th floor. He climbed the emergency stairs to 57. The camera covering those stairs had been malfunctioning for 2 weeks because Marcus had carefully damaged the cable during a previous round. He entered the 57th floor hallway using the cloned access card he'd created 6 months earlier. The hallway cameras tracked him, but that was expected. Security guards did rounds. His presence wasn't suspicious. He walked to the blind spot, a curved section of hallway where the camera angles didn't quite overlap. In that blind spot was the emergency stairwell door. It didn't latch properly. Marcus had discovered this 18 months ago and never reported it because he understood it might be useful. He slipped into the stairwell at 11:45 p.m., waited, listened. At 11:46 p.m., he heard Adrian enter his office, heard the door close, heard the lock engage. At 11:47 p.m., the motion sensors inside Adrian's office went still. Marcus waited another minute. Then he moved. He went to the old server room B, and entered the code 375375. The door opened silently. He'd oiled the hinges weeks ago during a night when nobody was watching. Inside, he booted up the terminal. It took 47 seconds to initialize. Ancient equipment by modern standards. He logged in with the admin credentials. He pulled out the notebook where he'd written Adrian's current password, March 2021 AL, based on the pattern he'd documented. He navigated to the financial server login portal. Username, alangfordoriontech.com. Password, March 2021 L. The system prompted for an RSA token code. Marcus didn't have the physical token. That was in Adrian's briefcase in his office. But he'd photographed the token's serial number during one of his unauthorized visits to Adrian's office. He'd researched the algorithm used by that specific token model, and he'd written a simple script, downloaded from a hacker forum and modified at a public library, that could generate valid codes if you had the serial number and knew the server time. He ran the script on a laptop he'd bought with cash, generated a code, 847293. He entered it. Access granted. Marcus exhaled slowly. He was in. The account showed $71,234,000 across multiple sub-accounts. All of it marked as operational reserves in Orion's books, but actually Adrian's personal fortune. Marcus began initiating transfers. He'd planned this meticulously. 5 separate transactions to 8 different accounts, spreading the money to avoid triggering automated fraud detection systems that flag single large transfers. Transfer 1, $18,000 to Malta account. Transfer 2, $15,000 to Belize account. Transfer 3, $9,000 to Montenegro account. Transfer 4, $17,000 to Cyprus account 1. Transfer 5, $234,000 to accounts in Cyprus and Hong Kong. Split. Each transfer required authentication. Each authentication was approved because the system saw requests coming from inside the building's secure network using Adrian's credentials during his normal access window. The transfers completed at 12:02 a.m. Marcus cleared the terminal history, shut down the computer, left the server room and carefully closed the door behind him. He walked down the emergency stairs to the 56th floor, took the service elevator to the lobby, returned to his security desk at 12:08 a.m. On camera, it looked like a routine round. Nothing unusual, just Marcus doing his job. He sat at his desk for another hour, watching monitors, documenting his shift in the logbook. At 1:15 a.m., he wrote, "Completed rounds, all clear, no incidents." At 2:00 a.m., Adrian still hadn't left. That was unusual, but not unprecedented. Sometimes he worked until 3 or 4 a.m. At 3:30 a.m., Marcus completed his final rounds. At 6 a.m., the day shift arrived. Marcus handed over the logbook, mentioned that the CEO was apparently still in his office since his car was in the garage, and left the building. He walked to his Honda Civic parked 3 blocks away, drove to his apartment, loaded 2 duffel bags he'd packed days earlier into the trunk, left his apartment key on the counter, along with a note saying he was moving out. Final month's rent enclosed in cash. By 7:01 a.m., he was on Interstate 80 heading west, 300 miles between him and Orion Tower. At 6:45 a.m., Adrian's executive assistant arrived and noticed his car in the executive parking garage. That was odd. He usually left by 2 a.m. at the latest. At 7:30 a.m., she tried his phone. No answer. She tried his office line. No answer. At 8:15 a.m., concerned, she asked security to check his office. A day shift guard used his master key to open the door. The office was empty. Adrian's computer was locked. His desk chair was pushed in. His coat was draped over a chair, but his briefcase was gone. The room showed no signs of disturbance. Everything looked normal except for one critical detail. Adrian Langford wasn't there. They checked the cameras, saw him enter at 11:42 p.m., never saw him leave. They checked his car, still in the parking garage, locked. Keys inside his coat pocket back in the office. They searched the entire 57th floor, every office, every conference room, every bathroom. No Adrian. At 9 a.m., they called police. At 10 a.m., Adrian's CFO tried accessing the company's operational accounts to process a scheduled payment. The system showed the accounts had been accessed at 11:58 p.m. the previous night, but the balances were wrong, drastically wrong. $71 million had been transferred out of accounts that only Adrian had access to, accounts that weren't supposed to exist in any official capacity. At 10:30 a.m., the FBI was called. By noon, Orion Tower was swarming with agents, forensic accountants, and investigators trying to understand how a CEO could vanish from a locked office without using any exits, and how his secret fortune could be stolen using his own credentials while he was presumably present in the building. They reviewed thousands of hours of footage, interviewed every employee who'd been in the building, checked every entry and exit point. They found Marcus Hale on the overnight logs. Routine rounds, nothing suspicious. They tried contacting him for an interview about what he'd observed. His phone was disconnected. His apartment was empty. His landlord said he'd moved out that morning, left cash and a note, no forwarding address. They checked his employment records. Minimal information. Previous employer was a factory that had closed in 2015. Before that, scattered maintenance jobs. No criminal record, no red flags. They checked his financials. No bank accounts beyond a basic checking account with $247 in it. No credit cards, no loans, no assets. He'd been living entirely on his minimal security salary, filing taxes that showed near poverty income. They found his Honda Civic abandoned in a Walmart parking lot in Nebraska 4 days later, wiped clean. No forensic evidence. No indication where he'd gone from there. They traced the money. $71 million sent to 8 offshore accounts in 5 countries. The accounts had been opened over the past year using fake identities. None of the identities traced back to Marcus Hale in any obvious way. The account holders were ghosts, names built from stolen information, documents that checked out on paper but didn't correspond to real people. The money moved through the accounts quickly. Wire transfers to other institutions, cryptocurrency exchanges, physical cash withdrawals in multiple countries. Chasing it was impossible. Every trail went cold within days. The FBI's theory was that Marcus had made Adrian disappear, though they couldn't prove how or why, and then used Adrian's credentials to drain the accounts. But they couldn't find Adrian's body, couldn't find evidence of violence, couldn't find any connection between Marcus and sophisticated financial crime networks. They investigated the server room extensively, found the terminal Marcus had used, found logs showing access at the exact time of the transfers. But the terminal had been wiped, no fingerprints, no DNA, no proof of who'd used it. They analyzed Marcus's access patterns over his 4 years of employment, found he'd been in the 57th floor regularly, but always during scheduled rounds. Found he'd accessed the server room door, but that room wasn't restricted. Found nothing that proved he'd done anything wrong until the night Adrian disappeared. They interviewed former co-workers, people who'd known Marcus in Pennsylvania. Everyone described him the same way: quiet, competent, unremarkable. Nobody believed he was capable of sophisticated financial crime or making a person disappear. His ex-co-workers from the factory were shocked. Marcus, no way. He was the guy who followed every rule. Never even took a sick day. His former neighbors. He was so quiet after his wife died. Just went to work and came home. Never caused problems. Even the other security guards at Orion. He barely spoke. Just did his job. We figured he was counting down to retirement. The FBI brought in criminal psychologists who profiled Marcus as a patient predator, someone who could observe for years, plan meticulously, and execute without emotion. But that profile didn't help find him. Months passed, then a year. The investigation went cold. Adrian Langford remained missing. Legally declared dead after 7 years, though his family petitioned to have it done sooner for estate purposes. His secret accounts became public during the investigation, which triggered board inquiries, shareholder lawsuits, and eventually the collapse of Orion Technologies. The company was dismantled, assets sold, employees laid off. The 400 people Adrian had fired over the years filed wrongful termination lawsuits, claiming the company had been looting resources instead of legitimately restructuring. Some of them won settlements from the remaining corporate assets. Marcus Hale became a ghost, not just missing, but erased. He'd lived so far outside the modern digital ecosystem that disappearing was almost trivial. No social media presence to scrub, no digital footprint to trace, no relationships to maintain or contacts to track. He was the perfect person to vanish because he'd already been invisible.